Today's daf is daf ches, and we'll begin with daf ches and aleph, and the Gemara now is going to raise the following question. We had a rule that was established here on Daf Zayin and Beis that there are two categories of Rosh Hashana, one of which is actually mentioned in the Mishnah, and one in which is omitted. We'll start backwards. Which one is omitted? There is an entity called a Rosh Hashana, which is created by man. It's through a Masechet. Like, for example, when we talk about something like Hakrovas HaOmer, which is Mechadish, a new year as far as the new Tfuah is concerned, these are not counted in the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah because they are Al Yidei Maisa. Our here formulates a principle in the name of Rav Shisha that Midi de Toli B'Maisa Lo Kosh. He will not consider and calculate within the list of Rosh Hashanah that which is done through a Maisa. So the Gemara asks about Rei Yovlos. The Torah says that Yovel, the 50th year, with all its dinim, has to be initiated by the blowing of the shofar. And here I'll read the pasuk. This is Vayikra Chafei, V'avarta shofar trua b'chodesh hashvi b'asar lakodesh b'yom HaKippurim. So we passed the 7th cycle of Shemitah. We're in the 50th year. And on the 10th of the month of Tishrei, into the 50th year, the Torah commands that we blow the shofar. And as a result of blowing the shofar on Yom Kippur, we initiate the sanctity of the 50th year, the Jubilee year, the Karosem Dror Ba'aretz L'chol Yoshvel, which means that we free the slaves. Yovel he, the Torah says, Tia lachem, v'shavtem ish el achuzaso v'ish el mishpachto tashu, and we return those karkos that was sold for Yovel. And we're going to have a machlokes here on Daf Ches, on Beis, about exactly when the Yovel begins. But right now, for our purposes, the Gemara is assuming that Yovel begins with the blowing of the shofar, as indicated by the Pshuto Shal Mikra, on the 10th of the month of Tishrei. So the question is then, how could our Mishnah consider Rosh Hashanah Liyovlos amongst the various Rosh Hashanah enumerated here, when this Rosh Hashanah depends upon Maisa Adam? And according to Rav Shisha, a Rosh Hashanah that's initiated by a Maisa Adam in the case of Yovel by blowing the shofar is not listed and not included in the Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara answers that our Mishnah reflects the Shita Rabbi Yishmael, Beno Shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Brokin. And according to Rabbi Yishmael, even though we don't blow the shofar until the 10th of the month, but nevertheless, the mitzvah and the kedusha of Yovel is already initiated on the 1st of the month, meaning on Aleph Tishrei. And that's Memela, that's without a Maisa Adam. Again, we have to wait until the shofar is blown to make sure that it is the Yovel year. So, but that's just a matter of clarifying, and perhaps Lamafreya, we don't know exactly how that works, but the real day of Yovel, the initiation of Yovel, is on the 1st day of the month of Tishrei. And that happens Me'ilov without a Maisa Adam. That's the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael. And we'll soon see in the sugya that we're going to learn today on Amud Beis that the Chachamim rejected Rabbi Yishmael, and they're of the opinion that, for example, the avodim that go free on the Yovel, that doesn't happen until Bezin actually blows the shofar on Yom Kippur. But right now, the Gemara is assuming that our Mishnah reflects the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael. Rav Ashi offers an alternative answer to the question as to why the Mishnah considers 4 Rosh Hashana and only 4 Rosh Hashana, and we exclude the 16th of Nisan, which is really the beginning of the year as far as the new Paris is concerned after the Omer is brought, or for example, the 6th of Siman when the Shtei Alechem was brought, and that initiates a brand new year for the Menachos, from the new crop. And Arba Rosh Hashanah Shehem Bi'arba Rosh Chadash. It's not an issue, says Rav Ashi, as to whether or not the Rosh Hashanah is initiated by a Maisa Adam or Me'elov automatically, but the determining factor is whether you begin at the beginning of a month. And according to Rav Ashi, Achamim, when they wrote our Mishnah, and we'll see that Beit Shammai fits into this description, they only calculate a Rosh Hashanah when the first of the month belongs to the new year, initiates the new year, as opposed to the months of Nisan, we have the 16th of the month, or Siman, when you talk about the 6th of the month, those Rosh Hashanah, according to Rav Ashi, will not be calculated simply because they begin in the middle of the month. It's almost as if, this is my own addition, Rav Ashi is of the opinion that you can't have a month that's split into half. Half belongs to last year and half to the new year. So the Gemara asks, "Kasha b'echad b'shvat ki Beis Shammai." Okay, you work out, Rav Ashi, according to the Shita Beit Shammai, who maintain that the beginning of the month, or shall I say the year of Peros HaElon, is Aleph Shvat. So the entire month of Shvat belongs to the new year. That's fine. But what are you going to do according to Beis Hillel, who established that Rosh Hashanah Lilanos is on the 15th of Shvat? How could that be calculated? So the Gemara answers, our Tana is not reflecting the Shita Beit Shammai, but Hachi Gomer. This is how we have to interpret the Mishnah. Shlosha, there are 3 Rosh Hashanah according to Divrei HaKol, everyone, meaning even according to Beis Hillel. And that's because Beis Hillel hold that we're going to drop one of the 4 Rosh Hashanah, according to Rav Ashi, and that's Rosh Hashanah Lilanos, which is on the 15th of Tishrei. But the Echad B'Shvat, Machlokes Beit Shammai Beis Hillel. If we want to add a 4th Rosh Hashanah, namely Rosh Hashanah Lilanos, which is implying that depends upon Beis Hillel. Beit Shammai, according to Beit Shammai, Ein Achinami Rosh Hashanah Lilanos is to be calculated, and we jack up the number from 3 to 4. And according to Beis Hillel, we cannot calculate Rosh Hashanah Lilanos because we're going to split the month into 2 parts. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, and be Echad b'Tishrei. Now we're talking about Meiser Behemoth. And there's a machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon on the one hand, and the Chachamim on the other hand. And probably the Chacham in this case is Rabbi Meir, as we'll soon see, as to when is Rosh Hashanah from Meiser Behemoth. Because every year, those animals that are born in that year, you have to be mafresh maser 1/10, but you cannot be mafresh from this year's behemoths that were born to last year. So when is Rosh Hashanah? When is the cutoff point? According to one opinion, Rabbi Elazar of Shimon, that's Echad b'Tishrei. The second opinion is going to have it as Echad b'El. Rabbi Yochanan Shnei Mikra Echad Darsh. Both opinions, whether it's Rabbi Meir as Rosh Hashanah l'Maiser Behemoth on Aleph El, or Rabbi Elazar of Shimon who have Rosh Hashanah l'Maiser Behemoth on Aleph Tishrei a month later, they both try to interpret the same pasuk, a pasuk in Tehillim, and each one respectively has his own understanding of that pasuk. And everything revolves around what we call the pregnancy and the birth in tzon meaning smaller animals. When do they usually mate and become pregnant? When do they give birth? In larger animals, the pregnancy period lasts for a full 9 months, but in the smaller animals, it's only 6 months. Now, the new year for Meiser Behema is going to be determined by the smaller animals, which are called the kvasos or kivsos. And we're going to try to determine when do they usually give birth. We're going to choose a month when most of the animals will give birth, these smaller animals, these lambs and sheep and so forth. And that birth is the culmination of last year, was the pregnancy of months ago, and indicates and initiates the new year for Meiser Behema. So we have to know exactly when most of the tzon will give birth during which month. That's going to be the subject of Machlokas. Again, you might ask me, why don't we just check this out with the biologists? I don't know. But the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yochanan at least, that it all depends upon how we read a pasuk. Pasuk in Tehillim. Now, I don't know, Rabbi, say what your impression is, but I always thought Tehillim was easy, relatively, until I saw this Gemara. I mean, this pasuk we're about to learn in Tehillim is a killer. I have in front of me the Masechet and the article. I'm going to need both of them together to just simply translate the pasuk. And then we'll see two interpretations amongst the Tanoim. Shenema. Lovshu Karim Hatzon. Okay, so tzon, as we said before, the smaller animals, the kvasos. And lovshu, the word lovshu here means they became pregnant. And now the question is, what does the word karim mean? Karim apparently means like a clothing, a levush. So we'll read the English. He says here, the sheep of the flock became clad, C-L-A-D, which is levisha. But he doesn't mention anything about the karim, which we said was the pregnancy. So that you don't have here in the English, but I have it here in the Hebrew. So again, the kvasos of the tzon got dressed, clad, which is a metaphor perhaps for the fact that they got pregnant. Now, the pasuk goes on to describe the valleys. Ba'makim, the valleys, yatfu bar, will clothe themselves, so to speak, if you take it literally, with bar. Bar is tvua, meaning grains. So what we're talking about is the pregnancy of the tzon and the point in which the tvua is so fully grown that it like covers over the valleys. You can't even see the valleys. That's how significant the tvua is. And again, in the English, he says, when do the valleys cloak themselves? Meaning the valleys are covered with fodder. Fodder means animal food, which in this case means grains. Now we get to the third part of the pasuk. Yisro'au af yashiru. When it's finally time to harvest the tvua, now what happens is, initially when the tvua grows in the ground, it's very moist and soft. And we wait until months pass by and the sun beats down and heats up the tvua to the point that the tvua gets hard and dry. And that's the moment that's ripe, that's ready for what we call ktsira, for harvesting. Now, the pasuk is describing Yisro'u. Yisro'u means a certain sound. Let's see how he translates in the English. He writes, I don't know what he writes here. Okay, I can't find the English right now. But I'll tell you what the Hebrew translation is. He says that once the tvua becomes tough, then as soon as the wind blows, then the various kernels of tvua bang against each other, and they make a sound. The ashmiya kol, that kol, it's called Yisro'u. And it's almost as if they're singing a certain song. He says, Yiroa Keilu Ashibolim Mishoros, as if they're singing. Now, this process is not all or nothing. It's not that simultaneously, at one particular moment, all of the shibolim are dry and banging against each other. There's going to be a point in which most of the shibolim appear as fully grown. And that's going to be in the month of Adar. Let's keep that in mind. Now, from that moment in Adar until we finally, I guess in Adar, it's still developing. So we can see it on the, in the fields, but it's not yet fully ripened. So that it's premature for Ktsira. So we're going to wait a month until Nisan. And in Nisan, that's when we're going to do the harvest. And now we're going to have a machlokes, how to interpret this pasuk, meaning how do you relate the beginning of this pasuk, which is referring to the pregnancy of the son of the small animals, together with the next part of the pasuk, which addresses the tvuah. Rabbi Meir Savar, the way he interprets the pasuk is Amos I love Chukarim Atzon. When is the time that these small animals, the sheep and the lambs, become pregnant? Bisman, that's simultaneous with the time of Amokim Yatfu Bar, when the valleys are, so to speak, clad and covered by the Tvuah. And we said before, that stage of development is in the month of Adar. The Emosai Amokim Yatfu Bar Be'adar. What that means is that love true karim, you remember we said before that the word karim indicates that they are pregnant. So in what month do the small animals become pregnant? That's going to be in the month of Adar. Now, how long is it going to take from the moment of pregnancy, which I think in fancy English called gestation is the period of pregnancy, until the actual birth? We're going to count the following months: Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av. So we're going to pass 5 full months from the end of Adar until we get to the month of Av. In the month of Av, the small animals will give birth, so that Av sort of closes and completes last year. Now, what's the month that comes after Av, when we begin a whole new process? El is after Av. Therefore, Rabbi Meir insists that Rosh Hashana Shalahem, the Rosh Hashana for Meiser Behema, which is now being set and determined by the smaller animals, is El, because El represents the brand new year. The Kvasos have given birth by Av, and therefore Rosh Hashanah is the first of El. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon Omer, they have a different take on this pasuk. Amos I love Shu Karim Atzon. At what point do the small animals become pregnant? Bisman Yisroa'u Af Yashiru. When it looks like the kernels of wheat are singing, because as we said before, they bang against each other, make a sound. The Amosai Hashibolim Omros Shira. And when is the month, which is a little bit later than the earliest stage of development, when the Shibolim are already singing their song? That's been Nisan. And since the pasuk is comparing the tzon and their pregnancy to the tvuah that is singing in the fields, it means that the tzon, the kvasos, are misabros ben Nisan. They become pregnant not in the month of Adar, as Rabbi Meir insists, but rather a month later, because we're sort of comparing. The pasuk has A, B, and C, and now Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar are taking A and comparing it to C. Do you follow? B in the middle would be Chodesh Adar. And that's the moment that the bar, the tefua covers the valleys. But at what point do the tefua, the kernels in the field, start singing? That's a month later in Nisan. And we're going to now compare the beginning of the pasuk, the time of pregnancy of the kvasim, to the last part of the pasuk, which refers to Chodesh Nisan. So if Misabros ben Nisan, then again we're going to calculate 5 full months, and we're going to end up not at Elul, but rather in Tishrei. Yoldos be Elul. 5 months later, when they give birth, that's going to be Elul, and that again is the termination, the completion of last year's song. And now the new year begins on Rosh Hashana Shalem b'Tishrei. So the Gemara now asks for Idach Nami, meaning Rabbi Meir, Haksiv. After all, the pasuk does seem to equate the pregnancy period with Yisrael, Af Yashir, which is Nisan. And the Gemara answers to defend Rabbi Meir, Hahu v'Aflasa. Aflasa means the ichur. And there are certain animals that will become pregnant later on. The Havyon de Nisan. They're going to become pregnant in Nisan, but which is equal to the end of the Pasuk Yisrael Af Yashir, but that's just the miut. That's the minority. Most of the Kvasim become pregnant already in Adar, and then they give birth already in Av. The Idach Nami. Now the Gemara turns the table and asks the question on Rabbi Elazar of Shimon. You're putting all the emphasis in the Ibur of Nisan, you really skipped over, like in checkers, over the middle case in the Pasuk, which is referring to the month of Adar. How are you going to interpret that month? Ahu, the Charfiyasa. The word Charfiyasa is the exact opposite of Aflasa. Aflasa means those who get pregnant later. And Charfiyasa are those that get pregnant earlier. The Asyon Me'adar, a small minority of the tzon will become pregnant already in the month of Adar, but most of the Kvasim become pregnant in Nisan, and therefore we're going to postpone Rosh Hashanah until after Elul, which means the first of Tishrei. The Gemara says, Bishleim Rabbi Meir, I understand according to Rabbi Meir that most of the Kvasos become pregnant in the month of Adar, the earlier of the 2 months. Now we understand the sequence of the pasuk. Love shu karimatzon. This is the pregnancy of the small animals. That's bisman shamokim yatfu bar. That's in the month of Adar, which is a little bit earlier in the development of the kernels of wheat and grains. When at that first stage, the amokim are covered by the tefua. But ve'ikar nami, the reason why the pasuk now is going to mention the month of Nisan, Yisrael Af Yashir, is because there are also those kvasim that are late bloomers or late pregnacers, and they become pregnant a month later. So therefore, the pasuk mentions Nisan. El Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Ibcha mi Baile. The sequence of the pasuk is out of kilter. It should have said the following. Love shu karim atzon. When do most of the small animals become pregnant? Bisman yisro af yashir, in the month of Nisan. Ve'ikonami, and since there are those tfasim that are early, they jump the gun and they become pregnant a month earlier, then amokim yatfu bar, which means that now we go back to the earlier month of Adar. But the sequence of the pasuk is completely off. And based on this, the Gemara rejects the explanation of Rabbi Yochanan and offers an alternative explanation as to what the machlokus is about Rosh Hashanah le Meiser Beim. Amar El Amarav, Kuli Alma, everybody agrees. Even Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon love Shu Karmatzon Bisman Shamokim Yatfu Bar, which means that most of the animals become pregnant in Adar. Now, if you're going to say that most of the animals become pregnant in Adar, then certainly Aleph El should be Rosh Hashanah L'Maisa Behema. And now we're hard pressed to understand Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. The machlokas revolves around a different pasuk in Chumash, in Dvarim Perek Yud Dalet. Ta'aseres kol tvuas arecha, and the double language aser ta'aser needs a drasha. V'shnei masos hakosim medaber. Echad masa behema v'echad masa dagan. And therefore, if we're going to equate them, then clearly they should have the same Rosh Hashanah, because in one breath, the Torah integrates both Ma'aser Behema and Ma'aser Peiros, Ma'aser Dagan. And that's called a Hekesh. Is Rabbi Meir Sover Makish Ma'aser Behema Ma'aser Dagan, Ma'aser Dagan Samach L'Gamro Yisuro, Af Ma'aser Behema Samach L'Gamro Yisuro. In the case of Ma'aser Dagan, very close to the time that the malacha that prepares the maser is completed, that's when that's when he's chayiv and the chiyuv maser emerges. That's going to be the Rosh Hashanah for maser. Now dagan becomes chayiv in maser when you take it into the house, meaning you cut it down in the fields, you pile it up into amorim, and then you take it into that's called knisas pnei habayis. And that's later than the time of harvest, which is in Nisan, because as we said before, when you harvest the tvua, it's still very wet and moist. They left it out for a number of months in the fields to dry in the hot sun. And then, and only then, do they take it into the bayit. So the Rosh Hashanah for Maser, for Dagan, is going to be on Aleph Tishrei, is Af, by virtue of this equation, the Hekesh, Maser Behemot, Samach L'Gamro Yisura, which means Samach L'Zman Sheba Behemot B'Schayvot B'Maser, meaning the time that they're born, with the birth of the new animal. That animal, when it's born, becomes Chayiv in Maser, and that's when its Rosh Hashanah is going to be. And as we said before, everybody agrees that the small animals give birth in the month of Av, and now we want to say right after they give birth, it should be Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbi Meir insists that's going to be Echad B'El, that's Samach L'Gamra, and that's what we derive from this Hekesh. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, on the other hand, Sabri, they're of the opinion that Makdish Maser Behemel Maser Dagan. I'm going to agree to you that there's a Hekesh, but that's not the substance of the Hekesh. Ma Maser Dagan, Rosh Hashanah Shelo B'Tishrei, Af Maser Behemel Rosh Hashanah Shelo B'Tishrei. That since the Maser Dagan begins in the new year for Masos is Aleph Tishrei, so too the new year for Maser Behemel is going to be Aleph Tishrei. Not the way you said it, Rabbi Meir, that the Hekesh is teaching me Samach L'Gamro Yisuro, which would set up Rosh Hashanah right after the birth, and the birth period is in El Av, and therefore already on Aleph El, we should set up Rosh Hashanah. No, we're going to take the identical Rosh Hashanah, says Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, that applies to Ma'aser Dagan and superimpose it by virtue of this Hekesh to Ma'aser Behemel. The Mishnah says, B'Echad B'Tishrei Rosh Hashanah L'Shanim. Okay, we're familiar with this already. So it means that when you write a shtar, for example, a document that testifies that Reuven lent money to Shimon. Shimon was the borrower. And you have to include the date. So what year was it? How do you calculate the years? And for that, we use the Shnos HaMelech, the years of the reign of the king. And when is the new year for the reign of the king? That's going to be on Aleph Tishrei. So let's say, for example, we would appoint a king on the 29th of Elul. A day later, on Aleph Tishrei, begins his second year of domination of reign. And that's going to be the second year that we're going to calculate in the shtar. Tisnan, we learned in the Mishnah, in Shvias Perek Yud, Shitrei Chov HaMukdamim Psulim, VaMucharim Ksherim. If the date in the shtar is earlier than the actual matan mos, when the money was handed over from the malva, the lender, to the lover, the borrower, that shtar is possible. You cannot collect from shibudim, which means that if, let's say, the lover, the borrower, defaults on the loan, he has no funds, then by virtue of a shibud, a lien on his property, the malva, the lender, could collect from his karka, his real estate. And if that real estate was sold to a buyer, then the malva has recourse to collect from the buyer through the process of chibudin. However, that's only if he bought the field before the halva. If he bought the field after the halva, when there already was a shibud created, but now we have a shtar muktam, in which the date on the shtar is earlier than Matan Mos, and therefore people who might have bought this field before the Matan Mos, before the transfer of the money, they will be collectible by virtue of the earlier date on the shtar, and that's cheating the buyers, because they bought the field before there was a shibud on it, before the Matan Mos. And there's machlokas rishonim whether the shtar is completely possible, or at least he can use the shtar to collect from what's called b'nei chori, which means from the liquid assets that are in the hands of the lov, or any karka that's in the hands of the lov. But shtarim mucharim ksherim, if on the other hand, the date on the shtar is later than the Matan Mos, nobody stands to lose except for the malva. And if the malva wants to use that shtar, he can only collect from that later date, from the shibudim, from the lekuchos, the buyers. But that's his tough luck, because he accepted that shtar, even though it was meuchar. But now we have a problem, because in order to determine exactly what the date on the shtar is, and whether it's kosher or not, whether it's meuchar or muktam, if it's meuchar, it's kosher, but if it's muktam, it's possible, we have to know exactly what the year of the shtar is. And there's a lot of confusion about the year of the shtar, unless we have some sort of uniform way of determining how to write and record the year that the halva took place in. And therefore, we're going to use, says the Mishnah, the reign of the king in order to set up the date in the shtar. So the Gemara asks the following question, but we have a Mishnah that says, this is, I think, our Mishnah, if I'm not mistaken, B'echad b'Nisan Rosh Hashana l'Malachim, that on the first of Nisan is Rosh Hashana, not the first of Tishri. V'amrinan, and we ask the following question: Lamai hilchasa. To what extent do we set up Rosh Hashana l'Malachim for the kings on the first of Nisan? So what's going on over here? Our Mishnah seems to indicate that Rosh Hashanah l'Shanim is Aleph Tishrei, and Rav Chizda interpreted that, Rav Papa interpreted that to referring to Shtaros, but Rav Chizda said that Rosh Hashanah, which is defined in the Mishnah as Echad ben Nisan, is l'Shtaros. So when is it? When is Rosh Hashanah l'Malachim for Shtaros? Is it Aleph Nisan or is it Aleph Tishrei? Lo kasha kan b'malchei Yisrael, kan lemalchei umas ha'olam. So with regard to Malchei Yisrael, then Nisan is always the month of Rosh Hashanah, because that's the month of Yetzias Mitzrayim, when we emerged as a nation. But as far as Malchei umas ha'olam is concerned, they go by the calendar, and that is Aleph Tishrei. And all this was derived from Psukim back on Daf Gimel. Ella, the Gemara says, now that you're telling me that our Mishnah is referring to Rosh Hashanah l'Malchei umas ha'olam on Echad b'Tishrei, I don't understand. Hadi Amar Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda made a statement regarding Rosh Hashanah l'Malachim, and we quoted Rav Chizda back on Daf Gimel, and that Rosh Hashanah is Aleph ben Nisan, and he said, Lo Shana l'Malchei Yisrael, Havel l'Malchei umas ha'olam Tishrei manina, Tishrei manina. So the Gemara asks, Rav Chizda mas nisan asal ashminon. I need Rav Chizda to tell me the Mishnah. We had these two statements, and we clarified them by saying that Rosh Hashanah l'Malachim of Aleph Nisan refers to Malchei Yisrael, and Rosh Hashanah l'Malachim of Aleph Tishrei refers to Malchei umas ha'olam. So what is Rav Chizda adding? So Gemara says, "Lo, Rav Chizda telling us really the din that Malchei umas ha'olam they count from Aleph Tishrei. Rav Chizda cry us lashma. Rav Chizda really came to derive this from Psukim, and that was the Gemara back on Daf Gimel, which derived from Psukim that Malchei umas ha'olam have Aleph Tishrei as their Rosh Hashanah, with the exception, if you remember, of Koresh. Ibai is saying, but now the Gemara offers an alternative answer as to what Rav Chisda came to be Mechadesh. Rav Chisda ki Rabbi Zera Masnile. He interprets the Mishnah having accepted the principle of Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera Amar L'Tkufa. That Rabbi Zera says that when the Mishnah says Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah L'Shanim, what it meant was L'Tkufa, what's called Tkufa Sacham. And the Shnas HaChama, the solar year, is divided up into 4 equal Tkufos. Is what's called Tkufas Nisan, Tkufas Tammuz, Tkufas Tishrei, and Tkufas Teves. And now we're talking about Tkufas Tishrei, which is on Aleph Tishrei. So that's the Rosh Hashanah of Tkufas Tishrei. He says here that Tkufa, in the note, he says it's Biloshan HaKafa going around, which means it goes around and around. And all the Tkufos, the sun goes around and completes a circuit. And at every one of the Tkufos, the amount of hours in the day and the amount of hours in the night, well, I shouldn't say in all 4 Tkufas, in 2 out of the 4. In Tkufas Tishrei and Tkufas Nisan, the day and night are absolutely equal. In Tkufas Tammuz, the day is longer than the night, and in Tkufas Teves, the day is shorter than the night. But in Tkufas Tishrei and Nisan, they're exactly equivalent. I mean, for that you have to know a lot of astronomy. So this halach of Tkufa is very relevant to what's called Iber Shanim. You know, when we add an extra month to the year because of the differential between the lunar year and the solar year. And we're going to calculate the Tkufos, the way what's called a Hiluch HaTkufos from the beginning of the month of Tishrei, which is the Brias HaOlam, from the time that God created the world. Rabbi Eliezer, and our Mishnah reflects the sheet Rabbi Eliezer, says Rabbi Zera, and Rabbi Chisda accepts Rabbi Zera, the Omar B'Tishrei Nivra Olam. So there's Machlokas Tanoim. Later on in our Gemara, Rabbi Yeshua is of the opinion that the world was created in the month of Nisan. And therefore the Tkufa Rishona, with the creation of the sun, would be Tkufas Nisan. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer holds that the world was created in the month of Tishrei. And that's when the Tkufa Sachama begins. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Omar, he has another explanation about Mishnah, Lidin. When the Mishnah defines Aleph Tishrei as Rosh Hashanah, it means for judgment. The Torah says, Mirishis Hashana v'ad achris Hashana. And what does it mean? From the beginning of the year till the end of the year, Merishis, the beginning of Hashana, the beginning of the year, Nidon, everyone is judged. Ma'yehei b'sofa, what's going to be during the course of the upcoming year? And this judgment begins in Tishrei. On the 1st of Tishrei, that's when all human beings are judged. Somebody asked me, "My Tishrei, how do you know that Rosh Hashanah, as it says, Mireshis Hashana, is Aleph Tishrei?" And the Gemara answers, the Siv, it says in Tehillim Pei Aleph, Tiku b'chodesh shofar b'kesel yom chagenu. We blow the shofar in that month, and it's b'kesel. B'kesel means there's something that's covered, that's concealed. What's concealed about this month in which we blow the shofar and the holiday of that month? And here we're going to go on to Daf Ches Amud Beis.